Known as the first movie that actually out-Kubrick himself, the famous sci-fi Odyssey adventure movie, Interstellar, has been one of the most influential and recognized space movies for a long time. Held up as one of the best examples when compared to other sci-fi movies, Interstellar has a ton of different, mind-boggling concepts, a lot of which we'll go over today. In order to help me explain all of this information, I'm joined here today by my good friend and fellow space enthusiast, Ben Tilson. We'll cover most of the major questions that people tend to have about Interstellar, and decide just how accurate this massive production really is. Hey Ben, how's it going? So here's my first question. The massive, deadly ocean world known as Miller's Planet is the very first one that the crew of the Endurance visit. Now, due to its closeness to the black hole Gargantua, Miller's Planet has huge tidal waves, but more importantly, a big time dilation compared to Earth and outside orbit. When on the surface of the planet, the crew of the Endurance experiences 1 hour for every 7 years on Earth. Is this scale of time dilation even possible given the circumstances the movie presents?
Yeah, the interesting thing about the movie Interstellar is that Christopher Nolan, the director, actually had a physicist on set most of the time to work out actually how some of these things could actually happen. And the goal for this movie was actually to create a sci-fi movie that would be 100% feasible, well, not feasible, but possible within the circumstances of a futuristic human colony. So now, the thing with Miller's Planet is that time dilation is a real effect. It is observed on Earth, actually, with satellites in orbit. Most satellite clocks actually have to be corrected for time dilation. But now, time dilation of that extreme scale, 7 years on Earth to 1 hour on Miller's Planet, is absolutely insane. In fact, when Christopher Nolan first approached Kip Thorne about this, he originally said that it was just plain impossible to get that kind of time dilation. However, after lots of thought on it, there were a few loopholes that they could go through and shenanigans that they could pull in order to actually make this function. Now, one of those things that they had to do was put this planet incredibly close to Gargantua. Now, the event horizon isn't actually the innermost stable orbit. You need to go a little bit farther out, and this has to do with various tidal forces, and it's predictable based on each black hole, based on the mass, spin, and electric charge. You can actually calculate the outermost or the innermost stable orbit, and that was done, and Miller's Planet was actually placed directly on that. Now, the only issue with that is this is incredibly unrealistic due to the fact that any slight orbital changes due to asteroids or even just an extended period of time of just the photons, the momentum from photons bouncing off of it would cause it to collapse into the interior of Gargantua. Now, another thing that they had to do was they had to make the spin of the black hole. Black holes do have spin. It is possible and it does happen. And due to that, you can get even more time dilation out of this as the black hole drags space around it. It's called frame dragging, and it does provide the possibility to create an extremely large time dilation effect that is experienced in the movie. But this is about the maximum time dilation that you can get. Kip Thorne actually had to make the black hole spin at approximately the speed of light in order to get this time dilation. So yes, such a planet is possible with extreme time dilation. However, it's not exactly feasible, and we will likely never observe one in the real world.
Now, just a follow-up question for that. How realistic do you think is the Ranger's just obscene amount of delta V required to get off the planet?
So in this specific scene, when the Ranger takes off from Miller's Planet, achieves orbit, and then even escapes and leaves a lot of Gargantua's gravity well, a lot of issues come into play. And the main one being the fact that a tiny little craft like that, well, escaping a planet with 130% Earth gravity, and on top of that, leaving a lot of a giant black hole's gravity well, it's very, very difficult to get that much energy. However, it is possible, like most future technology, a lot of things are possible if you go far enough into the future. One of the ways they could have done this is through nuclear engines or even antimatter engines. So, antimatter is a really great thing because it does a 100% efficient mass to energy conversion, and through that, you can get huge amounts of energy released, and that would be most likely enough to allow Cooper and a lot of his crew to escape from Miller's planet and leave a lot of Gargantua's gravity well. And since these Rangers also power the Endurance, it would explain a lot in how the Endurance was able to get from Earth orbit to Saturn with just one stage, even though it's massive. And then not only that, but to be able to go through the wormhole and traverse from Miller's planet to Man's planet to Edmund's planet, it would require huge amounts of delta V. So the most likely explanation would be antimatter engines that can then also even be refueled potentially if one spends enough time in what are called Van Allen belts. The Earth's magnetic field does have Van Allen belts, and over time they do accumulate rather significant concentrations of antimatter. Nothing too significant, but that effect would be enhanced greatly on something like a black hole or a neutron star or just a regular star. So, possible, but not possible with today's propulsion systems.
Okay, so my second question today is, towards the end of the movie, the main character, Cooper, subjects himself to the mercy of Gargantua, and when reaching the event horizon, he is able to influence higher dimensions and reach back through time to change what his daughter, Murph, sees. Now, the physicist behind this movie states that this was because Cooper is caught by a vehicle made by future humans. How feasible do you think is this kind of technology?
Yeah, so this concept of higher dimensions is present throughout the movie. In fact, it's first experienced way at the beginning when Murph begins talking about and experiencing her ghost, which ends up turning out to be her father just from the future. Now, the thing with this is that it's very similar to the answer to the previous question. Whilst such a thing is possible, I mean, it's not exactly feasible. Humans are inherently three dimensional beings, and future humans, whilst they are future humans and they could have technologies unimaginable to our current present day, it's still rather unlikely because of how inherent our brains are wired to work in our four dimensions if you include our singular temporal dimension. We're so just inherently hardwired to work in this environment that it would not only be rather difficult to access any higher dimensions if they're out there, but then to influence them and to even sort of wrap your head and be able to do the science with them, to do any testing would be incredibly difficult. However, the interesting thing about this is that these future humans that manipulate these higher dimensions with Cooper and Murph, the interesting thing about them is that they could be from millions of years, billions of years in the future. To be honest, if they've managed to harness these higher dimensions, then they could be an infinite amount of time in the future due to their ability to leave this universe and potentially, just go set up camp in another one. So, whilst it is possible, we don't actually know if there are higher dimensions, but there's nothing that would prevent them from actually existing. It would be rather unlikely.
So my next couple questions will be about the actual ship, the Endurance. Now, in order to account for the long-term journeys the Endurance would take its crew members on, the special ship was outfitted with spin gravity. We know that the director made it exactly 211 feet in diameter, but is this really the minimal length needed to generate artificial gravity?
So, yeah, the Endurance, Kip Thorne actually did the math. Of course, he did the math on everything in order to get a perfect, well, pretty much perfect 1g of acceleration on this rotating craft. And the interesting thing about it is that it's actually very feasible. Like this Spin-Grav is a relatively good one due to the fact that the Endurance's diameter is so large. One of the issues that you get into with Spin-Grav is that whilst it's possible for pretty much any diameter, even very, very small ones, the issue that you begin to run into is as you get smaller, since humans need to stand upright, that means their head needs to be farther from the edge of the spacecraft than their feet. And then the issue you begin to get with that is that now instead of getting 1g just completely like regular, you end up getting maybe 1g at your feet and then 0.8, 0.9 g's at your head. And then that ends up making people very nauseous. You get motion sickness, and it's altogether a pretty bad thing. However, due to the fact that the Endurance is so large, that diameter of 211 feet, it does actually make this specific Spin-Grav pretty feasible and pretty doable. Of course, not in current technological abilities, however, far into the future, extremely possible.
The Endurance faces many challenges, but in addition to traveling many millions of light years at a time, it goes through a wormhole, slingshots around Gargantua, and has several mechanical failures, including when Dr. Mann attempted to dock and detonated an entire engine module. Even after all of this, the amazing ship is still okay to traverse the empty hazards of space. Does this ship have any material that we don't know of today, or is the design feasible, and is it possible to build?
So, yeah, the Endurance is a rather incredible craft due to the fact that it's so large and its propulsion systems are way beyond what we have today. So, now the interesting thing about it is the problems you begin to run into. So, normal spacecraft would never actually be running into the problems of traversing through a wormhole or incredibly close to the event horizon of a black hole. However, the Endurance does all of these things, like you said, and the issue that they begin to run into is that through most of these things, specifically tidal forces, just begin to rip most materials just completely to shreds. And now, in order to create a craft that's able to go through a wormhole and remain intact and functioning and stable, and to go so close to the event horizon of a black hole, you would need a material that just doesn't exist today. So, by no means is a craft like the Endurance even feasible in today's day and age, but future humans who have come up with more strong and durable materials would definitely be able to create a craft like the Endurance in order to withstand these tidal forces and, well, explosions and things that could go wrong, such as Dr. Mann's foolishness. And the interesting thing about the Endurance is its propulsion systems, it's actually powered mainly by the two Ranger spacecraft. They are the human landers that end up taking Cooper from the surface of Earth to the Endurance. It ends up taking Cooper from the Endurance down to the surface of Miller's planet, down to the surface of Dr. Mann's planet, and it's what he ends up jettisoning and falling into Gargantua with. And now, these propulsion systems weren't actually present. The main propulsion systems weren't actually present during the explosion on the Endurance, therefore rendering them unharmed and completely able to push the Endurance out of orbit.
Cool, yeah, that's interesting, thank you. So, in order for scientists and potential colonists to survive and stay sane, the Endurance and the original Lazarus colonists are each outfitted with a special cryogenic sleep chamber. While scientists on Earth are working on this futuristic idea today, the concept has not yet become a reality. How accurate do you think the examples of cryogenic sleep we see in Interstellar are compared to what we have today?
Yeah, with this movie, this concept of cryogenic preservation of people and then being able to revive them after sleeping for a very long time isn't actually explored in depth very much. That's likely due to the fact that the scientist on board here, Kip Thorne, wasn't a biologist, he was a physicist, right? So we just assumed that such a thing is possible, and it appears to be possible. We're making incredible strides here on Earth today with this technology. However, the interesting thing about the technology with the cryogenic pods that we see on the Endurance and on the Lazarus missions is the fact that when Dr. Mann is revived specifically, we get to see the process. And when he's revived, he's not actually frozen solid, but instead he's in a bath of water. Now, there are two ways of looking at this. One is that it's completely new technology that just allows you to sleep for a very long time. Or the other difference is that he thawed within his block of ice and then he was opened up and revived. Currently, we don't have any technology in order to be able to revive someone after being frozen solid. However, scientists are working on it all over the world, and there are various companies that you can actually go to that will preserve your body on the moment of death. And then the idea is that when the technology does arrive in order to revive you, then they will do it. And of course, it's a huge sum, but it's grounded in scientific fact.
Wow, that's really cool. I didn't know that. Yeah. So despite the fact that it is widely regarded as an amazing piece of cinematography, this movie held up extremely well when compared to actual physics and technology that we have today, although being slightly ahead of its time. So thanks to Ben for joining us, and thanks to you for joining us on this latest episode of Sci-Fi vs. Reality. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I hope you learned just a little bit more than what you knew.